It's the Knicks versus Canada, or at the very least, Canadians basketball team. What's up, guys? It's EJ Stewart, joined by Tommy Beard. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, and Audacy WFAN and original. We have plenty to get to on this episode of Orange and Blue Bloods. We'll be talking about this lawsuit that the Knicks have filed against the Toronto Raptors. It felt like a dead part of the NBA season, dead part of the Knicks season. Turns out things got very interesting over the past 24 hours. The Knicks filing a lawsuit claiming that a former employee who's now with the Raptors had stolen proprietary files and information to give over to the Toronto Raptors in hopes of giving them a scouting advantage. So we'll discuss all the details of that. That lawsuit is very interesting. We'll also talk about various different things I saw over the course of this past weekend, and perhaps some Knicks getting some disrespect by some eyes. So you got Team USA finishing up their exhibition tour before the FIBA World Cup, which begins this weekend. And the last win Team USA had that they had to sweat out, it was a comeback victory. It included Jalen Brunson sitting on the bench for most of crunch time. So we'll talk about why that happened and some of the conversation about whether or not Jalen Brunson should actually keep his starting point guard job with Team USA. And the age-old question, is Julius Randle still underrated? Well, the Athletic dropped their annual tier groups, and some Knicks fans weren't happy where Julius Randle was listed, not in the top 50 players in the NBA. So I want to give you guys why he wasn't ranked in the top 50, and we'll have discussion on it on the other end. Again, this is EJ Stewart, joined by Tommy Beard. We got Orange and Blue Bloods coming at you right now.
If your blood runs orange and blue, this is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beard. Let's get to it, New York.
Well, as I mentioned, Tommy Beard joins me as always, and Tommy, I guess there never really is a dull day in Knicks World. We can think that this is a slow time, and then a lawsuit, calling another team's coach a novice, and here we are in 2023 when it comes to Knicks basketball.
Never a dull moment. Truer words have never been spoken. We expected maybe some trade rumors, some wild, who knows what type of stuff we might see. But it turns out there is a lawsuit involved. So why don't you give us a little bit of the background and just give us the details as we know them at this moment.
Let's get it. So again, this is Orange and Blue Bloods. You can catch this podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Be sure to hit the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN channel over there as well if you want to watch these video podcasts along with listening to the podcast. So, see you in court. That's what the Knicks are telling the Toronto Raptors on Monday after filing a lawsuit against the team and former Knicks employee Ikechukwu Azotam, and apologies if the pronunciation was screwed up there. The Knicks claim Azotam, who recently was hired by the Raptors, illegally took thousands of proprietary files with him to his new position with the Toronto Raptors. So according to the lawsuit, Azotam, who worked for the Knicks as a assistant video coordinator and then as a director of video analytics and player development assistant from 2020 to 2023, took thousands of confidential files, including player frequency reports, a prep book for the 2022-23 season, video scouting files, and opposition research. Now, the timeline of the alleged events is important. The Knicks claim Toronto began recruiting this gentleman in June, saying the Raptors conspired to use his position as a current Knicks insider to funnel proprietary information to the Raptors to help them organize, plan, and structure the new coaching and video operations staff. So, of course, the Raptors had hired Darko Rajakovic to be their new head coach, and they're saying that this all coincided with these moves from Azotam to kind of get them a head start in that situation. So it was then that the Knicks were informed in July of the job offer that was given to Azotam by Toronto, and that he had began sending the information from his Knicks account to his personal Gmail account before then sending it over to the Raptors. Now, again, the lawsuit directly names Raptors head coach Darko Rajakovic, saying he directed Azotam to make the alleged theft. Azotam allegedly shared his Knicks' own Synergy account, which is a Synergy sports account. It's basically a analytics hub of information. I have an account that talks about college basketball. I use it for my NBA draft stuff. And essentially, he shared this account that was Knicks owned with the Toronto Raptors, which gave Toronto access to the Knicks edited game film, among other things. So a lot going on here with these allegations, and there's plenty more details I'm sure we can get into. But on the surface, Tommy, allegations in your eyes, big deal, little deal, or no deal?
I mean, to answer your question directly, the allegations are deal. Let's start here that they're just allegations at this point.
Right.
You know, it's very important to note we've heard one side of the argument. For those that have, read through the and the accusations, they're obviously very serious. But let's wait until the Raptors respond. Certainly, they Maple Leafs, their parent company and the Raptors have denied the allegations thus far in their initial statement. So we'll see how it plays out. But certainly, cause for concern. Obviously something we got to keep an eye on. This wasn't just, a minor infraction. And you mentioned the synergy accounts. For those that are unfamiliar, it's sort of like a Netflix account where, you have access to this information, but you can share it with your brother, with your uncle, whoever the case might be. Folks that work for the same company. I've worked at sites before where one person will, pay for the account, and then we'll chip in and we'll share the information so we can each look up, the amount of times the Knicks have run pick and rolls, or the amount of how the Raptors have ended pick and rolls, etc. So that's just one, kind of small piece of the puzzle. Then you get into the prep work, preparing for other teams and things along those lines. So that's kind of where things get interesting. That's where it could get deal from the Raptors standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a pretty big deal. When the headline first came across, I kind of shrugged my shoulders, saying, "Okay, I mean, this doesn't sound good, but I guess we'll see how this goes." But my first initial question when I saw this was, why is this a lawsuit? I mean, when was the last time you've seen an NBA team sue another NBA team? It's very rare these kind of things happen. We sometimes see players sue teams, but not another NBA team. And I think when I read these allegations from the Knicks, it feels like it stems from a lack of action from the NBA, because the NBA, according to sources to SNY and several other people who have reported on it, there have been so many great reports and breakdowns on this. The Knicks did reach out to the Raptors and did reach out to the NBA with their concerns regarding this. The Raptors say it was last week when they did. We don't know. The NBA has not commented on this yet, so we don't know when the NBA was contacted. But it sounds to me as if the NBA really didn't do much when they learned these allegations. They didn't announce any investigation. They didn't announce, and there's nothing in public. I mean, maybe they said they're going to do something behind the scenes or whatever, but as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't seem like anything happened. And the Knicks decided, all right, well, if you're not going to do anything about this, then we're going to put this on Front Street and let the whole world know what we believe went down. And they don't put the Raptors in the greatest light. Now, there's been several articles as well that have pointed to this kind of cantankerous relationship that is being forged between the Raptors and Knicks that, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I was quite aware of until the timeline of events were kind of laid out. This kind of dates back to Masai Ujiri running Denver Nuggets with the Carmelo Anthony trade. This dates back to the Andrea Bargnani trade and Joel Dolan feeling like he was embarrassed and basically pantsed by Ujiri for the move that he made there. And that there's a Kyle Lowry trade that Dolan actually nixed, because, no pun intended, because he didn't want to work with Masai Ujiri. He was concerned he was being fleeced again. So, and we've heard Masai Ujiri say that he doesn't like the Knicks. And so there's a lot, there's apparently a history here, which is weird, because also there was this report that the Knicks wanted to hire Masai Ujiri. So I don't know exactly what's going on, but I do think that there is bad blood between these organizations. And I think in any situation, there are very specific, and Knicks say that he violated not just laws, but also, employee bylines, I guess you sign when you sign a contract to be an employee for the Knicks. But there are very clear rules and laws about what you can and cannot take when you are at one employer and then you're going to leave for another employer, especially an employer that's a competitor. I mean, they're very clear. And I think that's where the Knicks are stepping in here. I guess the question becomes, is this normal? Does this happen often? And that seems kind of to be like where the disagreement has come. I've seen some people say this seems a little excessive, especially when you consider the amount of times Knicks alleged that you had Raptors people, basically signing into Knicks accounts to look at stuff. How many times Knicks files were accessed by Raptors people? That seems a little intense. But other times people say, hey, this is a league and people move back and forth, so you're going to have information that gets shared. What I think the reason why I'm annoyed is because, one, I don't know why, if you're the Raptors, why you don't have this information. I know you're a new head coach in Rajakovic, and I know it's a different feel because with Nick Nurse, who had been there for a while, not just as an assistant, but as a head coach. You're changing a lot of things, but it feels like something basic like scouting reports and game film. It feels like you should have an archive of that. Are the Raptors just kind of working on a shoestring budget? What the hell's going on? That to me was a little peculiar. And for me, like I said, I'm a little annoyed at the NBA for not at least announcing that something was going down or that they were going to be looking into this. It just feels like this is another example of the Knicks, the NBA kind of not taking the Knicks very seriously when they kind of get when they get done wrong. We saw that with the Dallas Mavericks and the whole tanking at the end of the season so that the Knicks don't get a pick. And now we're seeing it here. I think that's part of the reason why Dolan and the Knicks took this move, made this the thing that they wanted to do, instead of just kind of letting this go away quietly.
Yeah, the thing is, we don't know how seriously the NBA took the initial, allegations. Did they? Right. You mentioned that the Knicks put the Raptors on Front Street, and that's 100% true. And that's what Adam Silver does not want. You do not want your two employees, because they're a collective unit. Essentially they're two co-owners, part of a larger collective group of colleagues. You don't want them battling it out in federal court now. That takes it out of Silver's hands, which makes it very uncomfortable for all involved, especially the NBA. But we know Dolan, who's particularly litigious. So if there's one team that would go to such lengths, it's not shocking that it's the Knicks. In terms of does this happen, I think that's kind of going to get to the key point of this. I think it probably happens more often than we are aware. I don't know to the extent, but it's one of those things. Yeah, if you're driving, the speed limit 65 and you're going 62, are you breaking the law? Yeah, kind of, but you can let it slide. That's kind of where we get into that gray area here. Are they busted for jaywalking, even though it's illegal to jaywalk? Is this something that that federal courts are going to take seriously? Potentially, again, because it's out of the NBA's hands now, so it's intellectual property rights. There's all these other things that are really difficult. We can bring an IP law attorney that could explain it. We're lowly basketball analysts, and that's what is really gonna make this thing interesting. So that's what I'll say. We see it in sports a lot. Not to this extent certainly, but the Cowboys are playing the Giants. The Giants waived a backup linebacker 2 weeks ago. The Cowboys will sign him to a practice squad in advance of a Week 14 game, so they get a feel for the practice and those kind of things. Again, if the Knicks employee, certainly the Raptors would have had him come in and debrief them, so to speak. And say, hey, this is how we prepare. We use synergy. Then we have 4 guys that break down the opponent, and then we have 2 guys break down, and then they cut it up, and then they give it to the assistant coach, and the assistant coach watches it, and he watches, the first half an hour, the defense, just kind of the system schematically, the operandi of the franchise. It gets taken to a different level when you take the literal, again, intellectual property rights. The synergy stuff is I think grabbed a lot of headlines initially, but to me, the kind of smoking gun stuff is if there was preparation material. So this is how we're going to defend Pascal Siakam. This is where he's effective. Lower left block, he shoots 36%. Again, this stuff is accessible, but it does take time. It does take, it's you have to learn where to look at synergy, learn what stuff to look at, and then piece together different components of it. Again, not rocket science, but one of the things the Knicks have advantage of, and one of the things Dolan has availed himself to, is their advanced analytics department. This wasn't a priority in years past with Leon Rose and World Wide West and Brock Allen, and Scott Perry, kind of ushered in as well. Was a commitment to advanced analytics. And that's something, you have salary cap in the NBA. You're probably only going to pay your head coach, a certain amount, but you can spend, limitless funds on, you can't work, sort of outspend these other teams by outsourcing additional assistant coaches, additional film guys, and things along those lines. Kind of take advantage of your resources. You're bringing in more money. You have a larger arena. You sell more tickets and jerseys, etc. So I think that's kind of where the Knicks were. Clearly, they stated in the suit. This is information we've developed over years. That only we possess, and it's illegal for this individual to take that information, forward it to, and the fact that he, forwarded from his Knicks account to his Gmail account, this stuff so traceable nowadays. It's obviously a foolish, decision by the kid. But the other thing is, and you mentioned time and again, it's almost a personal attack on the Raptors head coach. Which takes this thing to a whole nother level, and that's so. The kid said, I say he's a kid. In his mid-20s or late 20s, contacts the Raptors and says, "Hey, my guys are looking for a video coordinator. I'm the video coordinator for the Knicks. If you hire me, I bring this years of experience, etc. I can also tell you how the Knicks get things done." And he pitches the idea. But if the Raptors new head coach says, "Listen, we'll hire you, but you need to, bring this proprietary information." The one thing that I haven't seen answered yet, also, as sort of an aside, it's odd how quiet Shams and Woj have been on this.
I know.
This is a major story that transcends the Knicks, that transcends the NBA. This is a CNN, New York Times story. So as an aside, I'm shocked that those guys have been as quiet about it.
I know.
So that
makes me wonder why that is. I mean, is there a gag order from the NBA? Like, why is this not being reported by the top?
Very interesting. Very interesting. We could put our tin hat and, maybe it's close to the jury. But again, so it's one thing if the kid says, "Listen, this stuff, do you guys want it?" Okay. He talks to the guy who hired him, was the assistant to the assistant regional man, something along those lines. That's one thing. But again, if it's the head coach saying, "We need this, forward me this directly," and the Knicks again mention him by name, which makes me think, do they know where the information was forwarded to and how it was accessed? So that's the thing that makes that, the fact that they didn't say the organization, the Raptors, again, they mentioned the head coach, that's where things get really tricky. We've seen this with the Astros. If this is proven true, again, even if it's not the worst thing in the world, even if it's not, finable by jail time, the Raptors may have no other choice but to fire the head coach.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, it's one of those things where you're talking about federal lawsuit. There could be subpoenas happening. Like, one of the claims here was, apparently the Knicks saw in an email. I don't know how or why this young man did this, but like he apparently sent something over to one of the Raptors video coordinators, and it says synergy login information. It was like literally the topic of the email. And this is just the first initial claims of allegations and evidence. We don't know what the Knicks have beyond that. So if they're confident enough to say that, because that was the one thing where I thought maybe the Knicks jumped out the window, and I still wonder if they jumped out the window. Because if you're saying the head coach directed this young man to do this, how the hell do you prove that? Well, the way you would prove that, quite frankly, is to take it to court. Like, I don't think you would ever prove that in an NBA investigation, because I don't think the NBA,
or unless you have the electronic receipts.
Right, exactly. But like my thought process would be, if it's his personal email, I guess there's no reason why they would maybe have that information. He sent his personal email, "Hey, coach, I got this stuff." True. Maybe they don't have that. Right. But they may think, "Hey, we go take this to federal court. we can show that he's getting this directive from the head coach. Why they think that they know that, I don't know. Like you said, maybe there are some electronic receipts that kind of point in that direction. But that to me was the big thing. And I agree. The fact that it's not being covered as much is interesting because, I mean, the head coach is implicated. The head coach of the Toronto Raptors doesn't get to coach a game because he has to be fired or he has to be suspended. Like, this can end up being a major deal.
My last 2 points on this. One, my initial reaction when I first saw it, because I didn't kind of understand the rest of it. Again, we still don't know the details. We don't know the Raptors side, et cetera. Important to, kind of lead with that. My initial gut reaction was, well, this means the Knicks are not going to trade for OG Anunoby anytime soon. Maybe, if he comes in and they, analyze that new member of CAA, et cetera. There was some talk that maybe Siakam, three trade Randle or something, that might be something they discuss, if the Raptors get off to a slow start. Again, the Raptors have to make some important decisions the next few months. But now we can safely assume these two teams will obviously never trade in the foreseeable future until the parties, the front office, the Rose is gone and the jury's, years down the road. And the other thing is, Silver does not want this to go to trial. He does not want the recovery. He does not want teams to go, take a stand under oath and questioned by litigious attorneys looking to kind of uncover truths and trade secrets and all this other stuff. So he's doing everything in his power for this to be settled quietly and for the league to release a memo on a 4:30 on a Friday in mid-September, and this thing kind of gets swept under the rug. See if that's the case. We'll see if it gets dragged out, but it'll be interesting.
And my last thing on this as well is, I know, the language of the lawsuit and the personal nature of the lawsuit feels very James Dolan, but I think the fact that this lawsuit is happening makes me kind of dismiss the whole James Dolan's a petty dude kind of spiel. Like, you would think that this is something that Leon Rose clearly is not happy about. Like, I don't think that Leon Rose doesn't care about this, but James Dolan would even have the information to look into this and say, oh, you know what, I want to file. Like, I don't think that that's happening. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm underestimating, the mustache twirling James Dolan here. But the fact that this is getting to a lawsuit tells me that Leon isn't happy that this happened. And if Leon isn't happy that this happened, then that's what makes this a big deal. Because I think this was just like your typical, I want to face scam people, whatever. Like that stuff, okay, whatever. This is a basketball-related thing. And again, there are some people who worked in organizations saying, oh, this is normal practices. Leon Rose is all about relationships. Leon Rose is all about making sure that that the Knicks are seen in a certain light. He's not about burning bridges and causing issues unnecessarily. So if this is going to this length, it feels like there was a true affront that happened possibly in this situation. And that's what makes me raise my eyebrows and makes me keep watching, because Leon is not the kind of guy that I think is going to be crying over spilled milk. Like, if he's going to make this big a stink about this, then something bigger afoot may be happening here.
I would say it's more likely that Dolan is the bigger part, but he's certainly, you would think, unless, Rose, we get a press release that's saying he's resigned because he disagrees with the decision, those lines, that he, at the very least, signed off on it, said, yes, I agree with that. This is completely inappropriate. I'm cool with you, going forward with the organization going forward with the
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll continue to follow, see how that story goes. But I don't get the impression that's going to be one that's going to go away anytime soon. But let's shift gears here. So Team USA wrapped up its exhibition circuit with an overtime win over Germany this past weekend. And now there are questions about who should start at point guard for the U.S. Brunson struggled defending Germany's guards on Saturday, which led to him getting benched midway through the third quarter, with the Americans down double digits. Indiana Pacers guard Tyrese Haliburton played most of the rest of the game, along with Austin Reeves and Anthony Edwards, as the U.S. stormed back to win the game. The game led many observers to not only make the case that Haliburton should start over Brunson once the tournament begins on August 26th for the FIBA World Cup, but that Haliburton was a better player than Brunson, better NBA player than Brunson. Bill Simmons tweeting, quote, Team USA's biggest issue for the actual tournament, accepting that Haliburton and Reeves are two of the best players on the team. They're going to have to be out there in any big situation, even if feelings get hurt. So, would Team USA, in your eyes, Tommy, be better off starting Tyrese Haliburton moving forward?
So two different questions here. Is Haliburton a better player than Brunson, and should Haliburton start? Because again, is Josh Hart a better player than RJ Barrett? That's a good argument to have. We see it all the time. Was Manu Ginobili better than the guys starting ahead of him on the Spurs?
Steven Jackson or Bruce Bowen, whoever. Yeah,
all that stuff. It just happened to be the way that the team was constructed, and you have Tony Parker kind of doing his thing offensively, and then take him out and let him kind of run the focal point of the team, etc. So we'll get into kind of the Haliburton Brunson debate, but you can make a realistic argument that the Team USA is better suited to have Haliburton start because he's a better point of attack defender, and the Knicks have plenty of offensive options in that starting unit. Brandon Ingram, obviously Anthony Edwards, who's establishing himself as a star right before our very eyes at an incredibly young age, just 22. All that other stuff gets split into. Personally, I think Brunson has earned the right to start. He's a leader. We know he's going to put up points. He's shown us most importantly for me, he's the proven postseason performer. So when things get crazy, again, that's different than an exhibition game in the United Arab Emirates, in a game that essentially means nothing, compared to a game, a gold medal game, a Final Four game where if they lose, they can't, the best they can do is the bronze. Against Spain, a month from now. I have full faith in Jalen Brunson. He will put the low spots. Is Haliburton a great player? Yes. Do I think he has a very good chance of putting up some good numbers? Absolutely. Do I think, can he contribute and make an impact? Yes. So I wouldn't certainly bet against, I wouldn't be opposed to Haliburton getting many extended minutes. My thing is this, and we talked about this last week when we talked about the lead up to Team USA. Having Haliburton on the court does not mean that Jalen Brunson's not on the court, and vice versa. Having Brunson on the court doesn't mean Haliburton. So to Bill Simmons' point, also, Haliburton can be part of the Knicks Team USA's closing five, and Brunson can be a part of the closing five as well. They can go small, put Anthony Edwards on the wing. Haliburton's tall and lengthy enough, to play off guard or to defend two guards and small forwards, etc. You got Aaron Jackson at center. And there's just a bunch of different options. Again, Brandon Ingram hasn't played well. Does he deserve to be part of the Final Five? I think trusting her. I thought I was fine with the decision to leave Haliburton in the game. Him and Edwards sparked the comeback. Let those guys fish it out. It's an exhibition game. Give Haliburton some reps as kind of that closing unit. All that being said, roundabout way, I believe Brunson should be the starting point guard. I think he will be the starting point guard. But again, Steve Kerr is going to be fluid. And the one part of Simmons' tweet I agree with, egos cannot play a part in what goes on here. We saw how that's impacted Team USA in years past. And the one thing we know about Brunson, he's content starting. He's content coming off the bench. When you call his number, he'll be ready and he'll deliver.
Yeah, I mean, Brunson did not play well in this game. He was 2 for 6.
Right.
His defense was not good. He had a bad game. There's no question about that. And Haliburton said after the game that, he felt like the second unit actually kind of cost the Team USA in the first half. They didn't play well, and it kind of allowed Germany to kind of get momentum. And he felt like the second unit felt like they had to kind of take the game back, which is what they did. I mean, he was fantastic. So was Austin Reeves. Anthony Edwards was spectacular as well. The problem I had, though, with some of the dialogue was, it was one game against Germany. It was a good team, but like not an elite team. And Team USA should have played much better, obviously. But it's one game, the last game of an exhibition circuit where you've played all these games leading up to the FIBA World Cup. These guys are just ready to now start playing real games against teams that are competing for the World Cup. And teammates got caught sleeping, and it felt like Jalen Brunson, because of the nature of how the game went, became like the whipping boy for like everything that's wrong with Team USA and why they need to make these wholesale changes. Nobody talked about when Jalen Brunson was 9 for 9 playing against the number 1 ranked team in the world, lightning everybody. Nobody talked about all the other games Jalen Brunson played where he was the best player on the floor, where Team USA blew teams out. and the games weren't even competitive because of how dominant he was. Here, a game where he struggles and the team decides to fight back, all of a sudden it's bench Jalen Brunson. I didn't quite feel like that was fair. I also was annoyed at how the like you said, I think there are two separate questions. Haliburton versus Brunson on this Team USA. I think you can make case for both ways. I talked about both cases for both ways. I thought that Brunson may not play as much on this team, and then he was almost immediately announced as the starter pretty much. So I was surprised by that, and I said that on this podcast. But then the way he played early on wasn't surprised anymore. I then got frustrated with how it went from that to, well, look at what they did in the NBA. And I believe one of these guys, I forgot his name, Josh, whatever his name is. I can't remember. I'll look it up. I don't want to just say whatever your name is. But, they're posting side-by-side stats saying, well, look, Tyrese Haliburton was better than Jalen Brunson last year. And it's like, the one thing I cannot stand when we talk about NBA players and we're breaking down value, and we'll talk about that in a second with the athletics rankings, is like salivating over players who put up these incredible counting stats for teams that aren't winning anything. Like that to me, it's like the most, like, you want to talk about being like a casual, you want to talk about being like the most like surface level type fan, like that to me is like the biggest way to show me that, especially when you're talking about point guards, because point guard play is about being a floor general. It's about leading your team to victory, regardless of what your stats are. All I got here is, well, Tyrese Haliburton was 20-10, and look at his field goal percentage, and look at this. When there's no context to how fast his team plays, his team is one of the fastest paced teams in the NBA. The fact that how many times his team, how many competitive games he was playing in, the team, I think, was like 9-25 in games decided by 10 points or more. So he's playing a lot of blowout games this year, and he's putting up these numbers. There's no context to how good the team was, like the fact that they didn't make the playoffs, that they were nowhere near making the playoffs, and it doesn't speak to their usage. Like Tyrese Haliburton on the Pacers was essentially the moon and the sun. He was everything. Everything went through him. He's running the point. He's taking all the shots. He's doing everything. Now he's doing it at an efficient level, but he's playing on a team that's basically saying run up and down, and you're the engine. You're the head. Jalen Brunson plays on a team with another guy that averages 25 points a game. He's got another guy that's averaging almost 20 points a game. And they play a much slower pace. To just point at numbers and say, well, look at Tyrese Haliburton's numbers. Clearly, he's got to be better. That's the most foolish way to think about this. And what I didn't see on these lists of, comparing stats between Jalen Brunson and Tyrese Haliburton, I didn't see playoff stats listed. But that would have been a non-applicable. It would have been an NA for Tyrese Haliburton because he didn't make the playoffs. I saw someone else quote, he had 6 30-point games this season. Great number. Jalen Brunson had 4 30-point games in just 6 games against the Miami Heat, who won the Eastern Conference. So when we're talking about comparing players and looking at stats, you got to add context to those stats, an actual analysis for what these guys do and what these teams do and how they play when you're trying to figure out where you're ranking guys and who's better than who. The stuff about Haliburton being a 20-10 guy, meaning that he's better than Brunson, was totally ridiculous.
Well, they put Russell Westbrook as the team starting point guard. He
right? Why not?
That's have we not learned anything? And as if Brunson's counting, to your point, as if Brunson's counting stats are bad. I just looked it up while you were talking. It's actually 6 career games. He had 5 games more than 30 points. Haliburton did this past season. He had 5. Right. 1 this season before. 0 was a rookie season. So 6 in his career games over 30 points. The final 6 games of the Knicks season against a Miami team that went to the NBA Finals, Brunson averaged in the 6-game series 31 points, shooting over 50% from the floor, 89% from the free throw line, to go along with 6.3 assists versus less than 2 turnovers and 5.5 rebounds. That's in a playoff series when he put the team on his back. Again, the problem with this kind of Twitter combo is you have to attack one guy. You almost have to knock a guy down to build the other guy up. They're both very good players. They're both terrific point guards. They can both help Team USA. One has a proven track record, not just this past season, but he buried the Jazz franchise, essentially, sent Gobert packing, Donovan Mitchell out of town. literally almost single-handedly while Luka Doncic watched from the sidelines. And the year before he came to the Knicks, played like an all-NBA caliber player, was, if not the fifth player in the entire postseason, that, in the top 10, somewhere in that conversation, played that incredibly well. And you can't dismiss that by saying, yeah, but Haliburton averaged 20 and 10.
Yeah, and it was Josh Eberle whose magazine, Sporting News, who posted the stat-by-stat breakdown to try to make a case for, I guess, saying that he said too much lying going on in the timeline, I assume about Jalen Brunson, where he posted all these stats showing Haliburton was better. By the way, in that stat also had regular season head-to-head. Brunson 2-0 against Tyrese Haliburton this past season. Knicks were undefeated against the Pacers in those two matchups. They played them and beat them later on in the season as well.
We need Wally Zerbiak's opinion on this, EJ.
Well, it's funny. Haliburton, there's going to be a playoff series in the future with Tyrese Haliburton.
Oh, no question.
It's going to be very interesting because Haliburton also, I guess, during the mic'd up during one of these practices, he's befriended Josh Hart. He's going back and forth with Josh Hart about how, he realized that, he didn't play against the Knicks when Josh Hart was there. And of course, I mentioned that they were 2-0. Haliburton only played in 2 of the games the Knicks played against the Pacers this year. And he said, "Oh, you weren't even playing that game?" He's like, "Oh, well, I'm going to go crazy against the Knicks this year." And, what people pointed to how many times the tweet was bookmarked by people. Yeah. I was one of those bookmarks. I will admit I did bookmark Haliburton saying he was going to go crazy against the Knicks. But he just always seems to find his way somehow in the Knicks conversation. Sometimes I think not even on purpose. Like, it's not his fault that Brunson was a starter and he wasn't playing well and he gets inserted here. It's not his fault that, he's getting mic'd up and he's talking to Hart, having fun, and that, that becomes a kind of a viral tweet on Knicks Twitter. But every now and then it just seems like Haliburton becomes the center of the Knicks world. It dates back to the draft. Knicks not drafting him saying that he definitely used that as fuel. Then he had, as you mentioned, the Wally Zerbiak saying that he's a fake all-star. We talk about the Trae Young stuff. The Tyrese Haliburton villain arc is way more compelling and way more interesting than the Trae Young villain arc, in my opinion, at least the way it's began. And I'm not hoping that somehow the Pacers do make the playoffs so we can see a Brunson versus Haliburton matchup, especially if Obi Toppin is still there, because now you got, kind of a nice NBA Jam rivalry. You got Haliburton and Toppin versus Brunson and Randle.
That will be worth the price of admission. And I think you're right. The basketball gods, like they somehow these matchups tend to find their way, into almost speak it into existence. I think do for like a, whether it's a 3-6 matchup or something along those lines. Well, the Knicks are to do their part. Let's see if the Pacers and Mr. Haliburton can get his team at least into the play-in tournament and give his team a chance.
And my last thing on that as well is what also annoyed me some of the conversation is what actually annoys me as an NBA fan is how often, because people don't watch the NBA regular season, like everything that is talked about in terms of where we rank players, the way we talk about players is in the context of whatever they did in the playoffs. And look, the playoffs is where you make your name. So I get that to some degree, but there's sometimes where it's like a guy who maybe is not that great in the regular season, has a great postseason, and then somehow he gets elevated to this new level that perhaps he shouldn't be at. Here, it was like the opposite. Jalen Brunson had a spectacular playoff, one of the best players in the playoffs this season, and that seemed to be thrown away to point to regular season stats. Like that just does not happen with most NBA players. Most NBA players would say, "Well, look, regular season, who cares? Look what the guy did in the playoffs." But with Jalen Brunson, it was no. Forget about the playoffs. Here's the regular season to show that Tyrese Haliburton is better. That part of it was a little bit annoying for me. But staying on this conversation about where guys rank in the NBA, The Athletic dropped its annual NBA tier groups created by league analyst Seth Partnow. Instead of a traditional top 100 or top 50, Partnow does this thing, and he's a former director of basketball research for the Milwaukee Bucks. He groups the players in specific tiers to highlight where they stack among the NBA's best. In Partnow's words, he's determining, quote, that assuming the player is healthy and paired with competitive teammates, which players provide the most value toward winning a title, which I actually think is a great way to think about ranking players. So I was very curious to see how did this whole thing shake out. well. With that being said, it raised eyebrows for some Knicks fans that Julius Randle, who was coming in after another All-NBA season, was listed in tier B, 4B on this list, which means he ranked between 55 and 66 among the top 120 players in the NBA, according to this list. In speaking about Randle juxtaposition as a player who plays well in the postseason, but in regular season, but struggles in the postseason, Partnow said, quote, "The very definition of a floor-raising but ceiling-limiting profile, a player who is exceptionally hard to value through the prism of championship contention, as getting to the playoffs is the first step in winning a title, and having a regular season innings eater or two can help a team get to the postseason without overtaxing its top players. But building with or around such players is difficult, both because of the need to move away from their preferred style once on the court." Adding that is simply not realistic to expect to be able to afford a championship roster, knowing that a near max regular season workhorse is going to have to take a much smaller role if a team has designs on making a deep playoff run. A very interesting read on Julius Randle. The power forwards, the true power forwards, at least, that were ranked ahead of Randle on this list included Giannis, Anthony Davis, Jaren Jackson, Draymond Green, Pascal Siakam, Zion Williamson, Lauri Markkanen, Evan Mobley, Kristaps Porzingis, and Paolo Banchero. For what it's worth, in tier 5 of this list, it included the likes of RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, and Quentin Grimes. That would have been players, I believe, ranked outside the top 80 or so. So between like 80 and 120 is where those guys would sit. And then for the highest rated Knick, of course, was Jalen Brunson. He made it to tier 3B, ranking him between 25 and 35. So I asked you, Tommy, given the explanation by Partnow, do you think that Julius Randle is rated too low on this list?
Yeah, so in full disclosure, I try not to pay too much attention to these lists because, number one, you got to try to recognize the intention behind creating lists is to generate conversation, which will generate clicks. Same reason people are saying Haliburton should start over Brunson. They generates some debate and generates interactions and all that other stuff. So that being said, I do like the way you spelled out, the way he spelled out the context with which the prism through which he's viewing the value, attempting to assess the value of each player. And like we discussed, as we discuss when we're having these conversations about rankings, about all-star appearances, okay, who are the guys, if you're going to say he's outside the top 50, who are the guys that you have ahead? And in particular, who are the guys at his position? So, right. Giannis, AD, Jaren Jackson, Draymond Green, even though he's a little bit long in the tooth, Pascal Siakam, okay, well, we can have that conversation.
He is a champion.
He is a champion, even though, Randle was ahead of him on the All-NBA ballot last year. Zion Williams, a whole nother, conversation. We won't even get into that. This is where it gets interesting, kind of that next, these final four names. Markkanen, Mobley, Kristaps, and Banchero. Let's start with Banchero. You can't, the same arguments to make against Randle, limited upside. You don't know what he's going to do in the playoffs. You can't say that Paolo is going to be a dominant postseason performer because one, he hasn't gotten it done. Didn't play all that well in his time at Duke in big games. So I just don't see how it's similar one-dimensional player that isn't as good as a passer, that isn't as durable, that isn't as proven, can be ranked, in the same class or even let alone ahead of Julius Randle. Yeah. Kristaps Porzingis dealing with a injury now, coming off a pretty good season, has never done anything in the postseason of note.
Yeah, he's been a poor postseason player. When he played in Dallas, he essentially got sent out because he was not a good fit with Luka Doncic.
3 teams now have given up on him. Obviously the Wizards didn't dump him, but they traded him away. Dallas was unhappy with the fit. We know what happened with the Knicks. So very difficult for me to see a logical argument. In other words, if you give 30 GMs the opportunity to take one of those 2 players, I'd be shocked if the majority, took Porzingis over Randle. As the author mentions in the post, there is a lot of regular season victories. You can't have a postseason run if you don't get to the postseason, and you can't get to the postseason without playing well in the regular season and giving yourself a chance to win a postseason series by being one of the top 4, 5, 6, 2, 3 seeds or something along those lines. Evan Mobley played obviously very poorly against the Knicks and Randle, and injured Randle in the postseason. And same. What has he done in the postseason to prove that he's better than Randle? The one question I had is in particular with Paolo and Mobley. Was it just this season, or is it the value long term? Did he specify?
He talks about it as a projection for winning a championship in 2024. He also added that he tends to. He had that was one thing I appreciated about this list, and I kind of wish got lost. It doesn't get lost on Twitter because, quite frankly, we just see a list on Twitter and people are crazy. Right. But he had a very detailed aspect of saying, he says he always kind of grades rookies on like a curve, for lack of a better term. Like he expects a certain bump to come from rookie to sophomore year purely just by development of learning how to play in the NBA. So someone like Paolo Banchero, I would assume, I would love to talk to him about this, got a bump because he's like, this is what you did as a rookie. I'm going to assume you're much better, giving you the rookie of the year in your second. Mobley's not a rookie, but maybe he got that same bump as well.
Is he going to bump up to 25, 10, and 5 in 80 games? I mean, that's what he's got to do to get past.
Yeah. That's the weird thing about this.
I can see that.
Yeah, that's the weird thing about this, because I thought his read on Randle was extremely accurate. I think that he basically raises the questions that you and I talk about all the time.
Same criticisms we've had for the last 6 months.
Right. And they're all valid. Like, I don't disagree with anything he said. He's a floor raising, ceiling limiting pro player who's hard to value through the prism of championship contention. Like, yeah, that's been the whole issue. Why we talk about Julius Randle as much as we do on this podcast. I guess the problem I have is in some ways it feels like Randle gets dinged for us seeing him fail, which he's failed. There's no debate about that. Again, we talked about that a bunch. But then there are these other guys who it's kind of similar to the Haliburton thing. It's not applicable. Like we have very little evidence to know what they would be in terms of winning a championship. And it almost gets assumed, well, they'll be great, so we're going to bump them up. Again, even guys we actually have seen in the postseason, like an Evan Mobley, like Kristaps Porzingis, those in small sample sizes, those guys were Evan Mobley was a non-factor against the Knicks, pretty much. Maybe you could say he was good defensively against Randle, maybe. But if you're telling me Randle was so bad, then who cares if he was a good defender against Julius Randle? You're telling me Randle can't play. So okay, Mobley, pretty much a non-factor, definitely a non-factor offensively. Got his lunch eaten by Mitchell Robinson on the glass. Kristaps Porzingis, again, got sent out by Dallas because they realized after the second postseason run, this guy is not going to be able to help us win a championship. That's literally the guy or team decided who's trying to win a championship that we're done with this guy. And then, like you mentioned, Paolo Banchero, a rookie. I mean, I don't know. Paolo Banchero is really good in this Team USA thing. I think he's a really good player. I have no idea what to make of what Paolo Banchero is going to be in terms of comparing him to Julius Randle, what Randle brings every night. And then the Lowry marketing thing. It sucks because I really like Lowry Markkanen's game, and this is a guy I've been like championing for years. And I actually ended up selling my stock right before he went to Utah because I was like, I don't know. I've been trying to say that this guy was gonna be great, and maybe it's not gonna work out. And then finally, he does become the all-star I thought he could be. But it just like I didn't feel like Randle got that kind of respect after his first year when he was most improved player. And and it was 1 year out of nowhere, people kind of wrote him off, and then he has this all-star season. With Markkanen, it feels like he has this one season and his team didn't even make the playoffs. And they're just automatically just shooting him up to the top 30, top 25, top 40. And I'm like, it was one season. His team wasn't good. Like, where is the like, let's see him do it twice thing? Like, when you're ranking Randle, I can't really rank him because Randle has not shown he's a championship caliber player. I said it a bunch. But my confusion is when I see the players in his position listed ahead of him and I see guys who are also unproven. Like, do you just get a pass because you haven't gotten an opportunity? Or do you get a pass because your opportunities happened a long time ago and you flopped? Like, or they were so short that, like, I mean, Evan Mobley played his time in the playoffs was so short. It was 5 games. like that you get a pass because it was so short. Like we didn't see him very long. So like, oh, it's 5 games. Maybe he'll be better. That's where I would have a question with Seth about how he came with Randle falling so low in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He was an all-NBA player 2 of the last 3 seasons. That's a top 15 player in the NBA. If you want to knock him, if you don't think he's top 15 because of his playoff production, fair argument, knock him down to 30, 45, somewhere along those, like, maybe, outside the top 30, outside the top 40, if you want to pick nits a little bit and, kind of get into the weeds and say, this, he does this, and that guy does that better, etc. But to drop him past those guys, I think is very difficult to make a rational, reasonable argument to defend that position.
What is your feeling on Brunson being in that 25 to 33 range when you look at those players? Does that feel right to you?
I mean, again, if we're kind of discounting the ability, or discounting the value of regular season production and exalting the value of post production, then Brunson should be higher on the list.
Right.
He may not, put up the 20 and 10 that Haliburton did. But when it came time for postseason, there weren't 10 players that you'd rather have on your team. If you were, you had one, if you could, you're dropped into the NBA Finals GM and you can pick your team. You're not getting too far before you take Jalen Brunson. You're certainly not getting to 25 players before you take Jalen Brunson. So I think that's, if you're going to argue that Brunson gets dinged because of his postseason, you can't not credit Brunson because of his postseason production.
Now, when you mentioned postseason production, guys listed ahead of him, James Harden. I mean, he's all postseason production. I don't know about that. I mean, I know Donovan Mitchell is a very good player, but I mean, he was outplayed by Jalen Brunson in that same playoff series. Anthony Edwards was miserable during the play-in, had struggles during the actual NBA playoffs as well. I don't know. It's a little tough. I think he's in the ballpark. I've always thought of Brunson as a top 25 player at this point in the NBA, whether you're saying you're just ranking them or you're just ranking them based on your team being able to win championships. I think that's where I would list him. I have a tough time with some of these guys that they listed ahead of him. And then some guys are just getting like career achievement. Like, what is Kawhi Leonard at this point? Like, okay, he's in this tier 2, which puts him kind of in the top 15 or so. But like, he hasn't actually been able to really play in the playoffs. Like, doesn't that also have value as well? Like your ability to actually be durable and be available. Like, I don't know if I'd listen in the top 50. Like, the guy cannot play in the playoffs. Like Chris Paul was ranked ahead of Julius Randle. Again, a guy who can't get through a postseason. He couldn't even get through a playoff series. Like, that
may not be a starter on his own team.
Right, he may not start now. He's playing behind, but the best point guard ever, according to Steph Curry. But still, like, yeah, that's a guy who's now going to take a backup role on a team that's trying to win a championship. He's not going to be a starter, but it was tricky. I mean, again, when I look at the guys that were in the same tier as Randle, but listed ahead in tier 4A as opposed to 4B, Chris Paul, CJ McCollum. Again, McCollum, is he a small guard who's a tweener? He has more playoff value than Julius Randle? That's kind of questionable to me. They put Robert Williams here. That was a little surprising as well. I don't think Robert Williams is more valuable championship than Julius Randle, as much as I love Robert Williams. Like, some of this stuff I thought was a little.
Gotta stay on the floor. That Harden thing, the worst one so far is having Harden ahead of Brunson. There's no general manager in the NBA, no coach, no front office executive. You could say you have one player this season. Who do you want, Harden or Brunson? The belly aching from Harden aside, you take Brunson without even thinking about it.
And you talk about contributing towards winning a championship. I mean, team chemistry has a little something to do with that, and being a player who could at any moment just blow up your team, blow up an NBA season. I feel like that would be of a concern when you're talking about
where was Kyrie?
Kyrie was listed in the same. He was in the same grouping as Jalen Brunson, so they were both in this. There were all these guards who were kind of all listed together. So it was it was Trae Young, Kyrie Irving, Drew Holiday, and Brunson. They were all kind of in the same listing, along with Zion, Lowry, Markkanen, Pascal Siakam, Draymond Green, and Chris Middleton. Interestingly enough, he listed De'Aaron Fox a tick above those guys. So again, you talk about playoff performance. I mean, Fox's team lost in the first round. Jalen Brunson's team won in the first round. I don't know. It was very interesting nonetheless. But I think that's a good place to leave it for this week. So I want to thank you guys so much for checking out this edition of Orange and Blue Bloods. Again, really awesome. Thank you so much for you guys for checking us out. As always, you can catch all of our shows on the on wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Be sure to the auto download feature on your streaming service to get these episodes every time we drop. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. You can find us on the WFAN channel on there. Tommy, let people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. Again, thank you guys so much for checking out this episode of Orange and Blue Bloods. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you want to see more of our videos, be sure to check out our playlist and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Also, don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date on our latest podcast ventures. Links will be in the descriptions. And as always, thanks for watching, and we will see you